All right, we're continuing on. Thank you for joining us. Okay, thank you for joining us after the inauguration, and certainly we want to pray for our new president. And as I was watching the inauguration, I thought of our lesson today and how to exercise wisdom when going through trials. And I just thought that, people that lead our country, that they need wisdom. And so that would be one prayer that we can all agree on, for our new president, is that God would give him the wisdom to lead our country. And so as we look at wisdom today, we are actually looking at how to have wisdom as we go through trials. I have my little diagram that I had last week, and we can see that sometimes trials are all around us. And remember how we closed out with Andre Crouch last week, and we talked about trials only come to make us strong. And, through it all, we can learn to trust in Jesus. Through it all, we can learn to trust in God. Last week, we talked about how to make it through trials. So last week, we kind of focused on the stamina or the strength to make it through the trial. This week, we're going to focus on how to have wisdom, as you go through the trial. But you can see here on the diagram, we have to get ourselves, we can't get ourselves outside the trials. But one of the things that we can do is put joy and patience and growth inside the trials. And if we, do that, we'll make it through. We'll make it through. If you hold on to your joy, if you hold on to your patience, as you see it as an opportunity to grow, you can come out stronger on the other side. So that was the lesson that we had last week. As we look at the lesson this week, we are considering the wisdom. How do we have wisdom to make it through the trials? And so the thesis that we want to operate off of this week is the fact that God gives believers wisdom to needed to navigate their way through any trial. Now, let me say that again. God gives his people, believers, the wisdom needed to navigate their way through any trial in life. And all you have to do, according to our verse this afternoon, all you got to do is ask that if you're going through a trial and you don't have the wisdom to operate through that trial, to make it through that trial, is nobody's fault but yours. Because God says here that all you got to do is ask, and he'll give you wisdom. But I find that a lot of times when we have trials that we want to do it by ourselves. It's just like the little child that's with the parent, and they don't want to hold the parent's hand, when they cross the street. I can cross by myself, Daddy. I can cross by myself, Mommy. And they don't want to hold the parent's hand. And, when they separate from the parent like that, they are out there on their own, and no telling what's going to happen when you're out there on your own. All right. So as we look at the lesson today, we see that God says that we can have wisdom as we deal with our situation. So the condition is found in verse 5, where it says, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given unto him. So now the condition is, if you lack wisdom, that if you don't have the understanding that you need whenever you're going through a situation, and it's interesting that this word lack It's a banking term, and it means to have a shortage. And so wisdom, we see, refers to doing things God's way. When we do it our way, then we find out a lot of times that we are operating in knowledge, right? But we can have knowledge to be able to figure something out, from the book standpoint. We can get into a manual and we can read something and we can figure out how to do it. But when we have wisdom, we have God's way of doing it, that we see the things the way that God sees them. And that's what we need as we go through situations in life. I don't know about you, but I really hate to read instruction. And most things today come with instructions that you read. And so when you read those instructions, generally, if you follow the instructions, it will help you to put together or fix whatever it is that you're dealing with. And that's knowledge. And so that's a good thing. It's a good thing to have knowledge, but it's another thing to have wisdom. And that's what God says. If any of you that are going through a problem, if you lack wisdom as you go, he gives us the solution. He tells us how to deal with it. And he says that let him ask. Trials should drive us to our knees. Whenever we have a problem, we shouldn't be trying to scratch our head and figure it out. That whenever we're going through trials, the first thing we need to do is we need to go to our knees. And as we go to our knees, the Bible says, let him ask. Let him ask of God. Now, this idea of asking is actually we call it an imperative. And so, God is saying, don't hope through a situation, don't wish your way through a situation. He says that if anybody lack wisdom, he's commanding us in the imperative mood. He's commanding us to say, let him ask of God. And over in the Bible, we are commanded to ask God for wisdom. And so if you're going to make it through your trials, if you're going to be able to deal with your trials, that you need to ask God for wisdom. And notice as we move on, who's the one that gives us wisdom? I call this the confer, the one who confers the wisdom upon us. And notice what it says here, that he said he gives to everyone liberally. And this conveys the idea of singleness of heart. Now you might say, well, what does that mean, singleness of heart? Well, that means whenever, I like this right here, that whenever God gives wisdom, that there's no strings attached to it. That he doesn't say, okay, well, I'm going to give you wisdom, but here's the strings that are attached. No, if we come to God needing to understand how to make it through a trial, God is not going to try to play some game with us. That he's going to be there and he's going to give us the wisdom that we need. And so it says that he does it with singleness of heart, that he has one intention on his heart, and that is to help you get through that situation. And then, it also means not only is he not going to attach any strings to it, but he's not going to do it with a grudging heart. He's not going to, put his head down and say, oh man, I don't want to do this. I wish I didn't have to do this. So that the idea of liberally means that he's not going to attach any strings to it. It means that he's not going to do it with a grudging heart. That God is looking down and he wants to bless his children. He wants to help them through. a situation. And then notice this. It says that he upbraideth not. This word upbraid means to insult, to reprimand, to scold. That that when we ask God for wisdom, he's not going to scold us. He's not going to reprimand us. He's not going to give us an ear beating. That when we ask God, I like the picture that we have here on the screen, and that is, God is not going to point his finger at us when we ask him for wisdom and begin to reprimand us or begin to scold us. Now, I think that God, in the midst of what we're going through, that there may be some lessons that he wants to teach us. There may be some lessons that we need to learn. And so, God may put us in a position where we will learn those lessons. But according to James, James says that God is he's not going to scold us. He's not going to reprimand us whenever we ask for wisdom. So we thank God for that. And then we see the confidence. Notice in verses 5 and 6, it says here, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who giveth to all men liberally, right? He giveth to all men liberally, singleness of heart, not strings attached, not with a grudging spirit, and upbraideth not. That, he's not going to scold us. He's not going to chide us. And it shall be given unto him. Notice verse 6, but let him ask in faith. James says that a person asks God for wisdom in dealing with trials, it will be given to him. But the key as you go through your issues, that you've got to ask in faith. You've got to have faith. You just can't come to God and say, God, give me wisdom, right? You just can't come and say, well, I need some wisdom. God, give me some wisdom. But you've got to have faith. And as I thought about, what does it mean when he says to ask in faith? You ask from an intellectual standpoint, you ask from a personal standpoint, and you ask from a volitional standpoint. First of all, from the intellectual standpoint, and that is to know God, that he can give wisdom, right? So you got to believe that God can give you wisdom. If it's just like on the Wizard of Oz, right? Dorothy and all of her friends, why were they going to see the wizard, right? They were going to see the wizard because they believed that he could give them, what they needed. Oh man, they believed that he could give them what they needed, right? Somebody needed a heart, somebody needed courage, somebody needed a brain, right? They believed that he could give what they need. And when we go through a trial and we ask God for wisdom, we have to believe that God is able to give us wisdom, right? And then we move from the intellectual, and now we move to the personal. And you got to know that God can give you wisdom. I have to know that God can give me wisdom. Because see, it's just like soap, right? There's plenty of soap in the world. And we can know that there's soap in the world. But unless we go to the store and buy the soap and use it when we get in the shower, it's not doing us any good, right? So we got to know that the soap is for us too, right? We got to know that there's soap out there, but we also got to know that it's for us. It's not, it's just like, I remember when I was in Colorado and we were playing a basketball game, and my pastor, he was coaching us, and he said, wow, somebody forgot to use their deodorant. And one of the guys said, well, I know it wasn't me because I don't use deodorant. So he didn't know that it was for him, right? So we have to know that that God can give us wisdom. We have to know that he can give us personally wisdom. And then the key is that we have to trust God to give us wisdom, right? And so, all three of these things are at play. As I seek God for wisdom, man, I'm going through a situation. It seemed like, man, I got one problem after another. I need to know how to get through these trials. Well, I gotta know God from an intellectual perspective, a personal perspective, and a volitional. That where I begin to say, okay, man, I believe, I've got faith, to be able to work through this situation. And notice what he says in verse 5. He says, or verse 6, and let him ask in faith, nothing wavering. This word waver, actually comes from a Greek word that means to stagger. That if you ask in faith and then you begin to, stagger, I think of Abraham, when God promised Abraham that he was going to have a child. And Abraham was 99 years old, right? When he had his child. And you think about, and I don't want to get too graphic here, but just think about this. Abraham was beyond the ability to do what it took to produce a child. He was beyond that ability. And yet and still, the Bible says that when God told him everything that was going to happen, in Romans chapter 4 and verse 20, it says that he did not stagger. He did not stagger at the promise of God. And the same word that's used there in Romans 4:20 is the same word that's used here in James. To not stagger, to not have a wobbling of your faith, to not have a wavering of your faith. That when you add, and sometimes when we're going through something, it's hard to remember all this stuff right here. It's hard to remember the fact that God says that I need to have faith, right? Why? Because we're dealing with something that's right on us. We're dealing with a bill that's in our face that we got to figure out how to pay. We're dealing with a problem that's right in our face that we got to try to figure out. And so the natural tendency is to move over into the natural realm to try to do it. But God says, no, you got to have faith. You got to have the going back, you got to know that I can give you wisdom. You got to know that I can make it personal and give you wisdom. And then you've got to trust me to give you wisdom. And as we do that, then we stand. And you see the picture of the person, got a little tipsy, right? They're staggering. And so when we have faith and ask God in faith, we don't stagger. We need to learn how to stand. And as we learn how to stand, I began to think about, what are some keys to asking God in faith and not staggering? Well, I'm going to help somebody out this afternoon. What are the keys to asking in faith and not staggering? Well, the first thing is when we have to ask with a humble spirit. When you ask, so I'm teaching you how, so I'm teaching. Well, I've been teaching all the time, but I'm teaching now. I'm teaching you how to ask in faith. This is how you ask in faith. You ask with a humble spirit. You're like a beggar begging for food. God, I'm in this situation. I have no idea what to do. And I'm begging you and asking you right now, Lord, show me what to do. You have to ask with a humble spirit. You have to ask with a dependent spirit. You ever, I remember one time there was a nest outside my bedroom window, and there was a mother who had some eggs, and she hatched those eggs. And I remember waking up one morning and hearing all this chirping on my windowsill, right? And I looked, and the mother was coming back with worms, and the baby birds were there with their mouth open. They had their mouth open, and the mother was putting the food in their mouth. And when we ask in faith, we have to ask with that dependent spirit. Just like those little baby birds were dependent on the mother to put the food in their mouth. When we ask in faith, we are dependent on God. We're saying, God, I'm waiting on you. Lord, I'm waiting on you to give me wisdom. And you know, next time you are praying for wisdom, maybe, and I'm saying this facetiously now, okay, but maybe if you just open your mouth, turn your head sideways and lift it up and say, okay, God, I'm waiting for wisdom. You know, just like that little baby bird, that you are dependent on God. It's like a trusting spirit. Ask with a trusting spirit, you know, like the trapeze artist. And you've heard me give this illustration time and time again, that the trapeze artist lets go of the trapeze in the middle of the air and is out there and is waiting for his or her partner to swing that other trapeze. Now, again, they're out there in midair. There's nothing. I mean, while they're out there spinning and doing all these flips in the air, there's nothing out there. And so they're dependent and they're trusting their partner to let the other one go. And with the timing that all they got to do is reach out and grab onto it. That's trust. That's trust. And so we need to trust God like that. That's what it means to ask in faith. It means to have that trapeze artist faith. We need to ask with a willing spirit. What does that mean? That when we go to the doctor and we're sick and the doctor tells us what to do, then, you know, we take what he tells us to do, he or she, and we have that willing spirit where we're willing to follow the orders. So whatever God tells us to do, we need to be willing to do it. You know, we can't be like the guy who was on the desert island, and some people came by with a boat, and he said, I'm waiting on God to save me, right? Somebody came with a plane. He said, no, I'm waiting on God to save me. And the man died and went to heaven, and he asked, God was waiting on you to save me. And God said, I sent you a boat and I sent you a plane, and you didn't take either one of those. You know, the man didn't have a willing spirit. You know, so we need to have a willing spirit to know that whenever God sends something, whenever God sends us the instructions, whenever God gives us wisdom as to what to do, we need to be ready to follow. You know, sometimes that might be the hardest thing, because especially, you know, if we think of what God might be asking us to do, because it might go against our reason. You know, it might go against the way that we think it should be done. We need to be sensitive. That's why he says pray. You know, that we need to be sensitive, that we're getting that we're willing to do what God is telling us to do. We need to ask with an open spirit. And that's like a pitcher, you know, a glass pitcher, that whatever you pour in it, that pitcher is ready to receive it. And so whenever we ask in faith, you know, we need to have that open spirit. Say, okay, Lord, pour into me. Lord, pour into my wisdom, pour into my mind, pour into the things that you want me to have. And then we need to have an expectant spirit, you know, and that's just, you know, like waiting to say that, okay, God, you know, you're going to do this. You know, I'm trusting you. I'm expecting you. You know, that when we ask in faith, you know, we got to have an expectant spirit. You know, it's like the young preacher that was preaching, and he preached, and, you know, he gave this little invitation for people to come and receive Christ. And nobody came to receive Christ. And afterwards, he was talking to the old seasoned preacher. And he said, I don't understand, you know, why. I mean, he said, I prayed over the invitation. I tried to put it in such a way where, you know, it would appeal to people. You know, I don't know why nobody came forward. And the older preacher said, well, you didn't expect anybody to come forward, did you? And the young preacher said, well, no, I didn't. He said, that's why nobody came forward, because you didn't expect anybody to come forward, right? You know, you gotta expect. I mean, if I'm in a situation and I'm praying and asking God for wisdom, I need to expect that God is going to give me wisdom. I need to be I need to have my sonar on, right? And I'm trying. It's the wisdom is there somewhere, and God is going to. So I'm going to expect God. I'm going to look for God. You know, it may not be the next minute, it may not be the next hour, it may not be the next day, but I'm expecting at some point that God is going to give me the wisdom that I'm praying for to help me deal with this situation. Now, here's where the confusion comes in verse 6. But let him ask in faith, nothing wavering. For he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed. For let not that man think that he shall receive anything of the Lord. And so confusion comes to the one who wavers and doubts. That when you waver and doubt, you are like a wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed. Look at that boat. Look how that boat is being tossed there by the waves, right? During a time of trial, this person is up and down, back and forth. 1 minute they got faith, the next minute they got doubt. I like what this one commentator says, R.C.H. Linsky. He says this about the one that wavers. He said, a thought strikes the unstable mind from one direction and then another. And the mind has no resistance. It just yields. It takes a thought and drops it again. Enthusiasm with a thought and then lets go of it in discouragement. That's what it means to be tossed to and fro. All right. I like that. So let me say this again. A thought strikes the mind of the unstable. I mean, a thought strikes the unstable mind from one direction, right? And then from another. So you got a thought on one side of your head, and then all of a sudden a thought comes in on the other side of your head. And so what do you find yourself doing? Going back and forth, right? Back and forth. And because why? The mind cannot resist it. There's no resistance. It just yields to whatever thought comes in its mind. That you are praying and you are asking God to give you wisdom, but yet and still you go back and forth in your thought process. And so you take up a thought and you drop the thought. It rises in enthusiasm with a thought, and then it lets go in discouragement. So you are back and forth as you go through this situation, as you go through this trial. And God is saying, look, you need to settle down. You need to settle your mind down. And so this is where the confusion comes in. And notice what James says in verse 7. For let not that man think that he shall receive anything of the Lord. He's not going to receive anything from God. And I like the what they call the Monopoly man, right? You know, when you watch Monopoly or you play Monopoly, you got the guy that stands pockets out and he got his hands to the side. And look what James says. James says that whoever wavers, that they shouldn't think that they will receive anything of the Lord. Wow, right? Wow. In other words, the one who wavers cancels out the request for wisdom. That wow, I mean, whew. When you have faith and you stand in faith, like I said earlier, when you stand in faith right here, to know that God can do it, to know he can do it for me, and then I'm going to trust him to do it, then I've got to stand in faith. I can't waver and go back and forth, because James says here that the person who wavers, that now here you are going through this trial, and you're praying and asking God to help you. You're praying and asking God to give you wisdom. And then you start to waver. Well, you know what? Right there, you can just say to yourself, the Lord's not going to give me anything. He's not going to give me a thing. Why? Because I'm back and forth. I'm up and down. My thoughts and my mind, it's like the Friends of Distinction, right? You got me going in circles, right? We just find ourselves, in this whirlpool of thoughts, this whirlpool that's just driving us crazy. And so James says that if that's the situation, that we're not going to receive anything from the Lord. I tell you what, man, it's nothing like saying, okay, Lord, I don't know how you're going to do it. I don't know when you're going to do it, but Lord, I'm standing on the promises of God. See, the problem with some is that instead of standing on the promises, they're sitting on the premises, right? And when you sit on the premise, then you're going to be pushed about, and you're going to be tossed about, right? And then then the reality of you having wisdom to deal with your situation is going to be this verse right here. For let not that man think he shall receive anything of the Lord. So, that's the bottom line right there, is that when you waver and go to and fro, that you, as I said here, you cancel out your request for wisdom to help you through your trials. The conclusion is in verse 8. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. You ever go out? So here's my testimony of being a double-minded person, right? When you go to the restaurant and they put the menu down, right? Oh man, I want salmon. No, I really want a steak. Oh, well, you know what? That barbecue chicken looks good. Right? And so you're double-minded. And so when you're double-minded, let me ask a question. If you're sitting there at the restaurant and you're double-minded, right? You want salmon, you want steak, you want chicken, and say your server is standing there. What are they gonna go get you? Nothing. Nothing. Why? Because you haven't made up your mind. You don't know what you want. You haven't made up your mind, and you're unstable. As far as putting your order in, you're unstable. And so James says that a double-minded man is unstable in all their ways. Now look at what I have on the screen here. Double-minded comes from the Greek word dipsychos. And you know what that means? It means two-souled. Two-souled. It means that you have two souls in you. Now, we know that we only have one soul, right? We have one soul. So I'm saying that. But what James is saying here is that you have a soul that's directed towards heaven, and you got a soul that's directed towards earth. And so, when you're going through a trial, you can't be two-souled. I like what John Bunyan says in the book, The Pilgrim's Progress. He says that he is a Mr. Facing both ways. Mr. Facing both ways. You can't face both ways. You either have to turn to God, or you got to turn to this earth. You can't be two-souled. You can't, look facing one direction and the other at the same time. that unstable in all their
Breaking
ways.
up again.
You know, till your faith becomes sight. James said, let him ask in faith. Okay. How about now? When we ask in faith. Okay, when we ask in faith, then we're not double-minded. We have to ask in faith, and we have to stand in faith, so that we can see the end of the fact gonna give us wisdom, that God will give us the wisdom that we need. And then I just want to conclude with this: what are the takeaways that we can leave here with today? When you are going through a trial, you can turn to human resources, or you can ask God for wisdom. The second takeaway: if we ask God for wisdom to handle our trials, He will give it to us. The third thing: we can't go back and forth during our trials, on one hand trusting God, and on the other hand doubting. So you have to stand firm in what you're asking God, and that's for wisdom to make it through the trial. Well, I had a trial here this afternoon with this computer, but thank God, God, He got us through. So we know that was a little rough one there. So, but just want to open it up. Anybody that has a comment or a question at this time. Thank you, and once again, thank you for bearing with me. I appreciate that. Hopefully, the word blessed your heart.
Anybody have a question?